Good afternoon to you. Mark Sudduth, HurricaneTrack.com, here with your Hurricane Pro and HD video blog for the 25th of September 2014. Even though the tropics have been very quiet in the Atlantic Basin, I figured let's get in here and take a look at what's going on and look at the week or two ahead and see if we're going to end September with any activity to speak of. A couple of interesting things to point out. There's always something to talk about, even if it's just kind of showing what has happened in the past. And in this case, check it out. This is the cold water wake left over from powerful Hurricane Odile in the eastern Pacific. Do you know what this is from? This is from Edouard, the Category 3 hurricane that took place in the Atlantic recently. And ever since, there really hasn't been much going on. We do have Rachel in the East Pac, which I'll go over in just a minute. We also have the warming of the central and eastern Pacific here, very slightly above the long-term average. If we look at the temperature profile, this is the surface of the Pacific. This is several hundred meters deep. This is the eastern Pacific. This is the western. And then what we have are these large areas of warm anomalies, these differences in temperatures compared to normal, these departures from normal, another way to look at it. And you can see quite a large area of very warm water compared to normal, and that is trying to work its way to the surface and create a warmer than normal equatorial Pacific, and we call that the El Nino. I think that it'll be officially declared probably by December, maybe January at the latest. It doesn't look really strong. We're not seeing another large area of deep red pooling back here in the western Pacific, these oceanic Kelvin waves as they're called, and they move across like this. So I think that this will come and go, which they usually do, and this will die out by next summer, and then that'll have some interesting implications for the 2015 hurricane season, but that's ways away from now. We won't worry about that. Looking at the ocean heat potential in the Atlantic Basin, now this is a fairly old graphic. The Hurricane Research Division NOAA AOML site down here has not updated this in almost 10 days, but this is still fairly valid, and the main point is that most of the heat energy here is still in the western part of the Atlantic Basin. So if we do have development somewhere in this area over the coming weeks, there's plenty of very warm water that extends below the surface especially, and we call that upper ocean heat content, and there's lots of it in the Atlantic Basin still to take advantage of. But the question is, will something do that? Well, let's take a look at that. First, Rachel in the eastern Pacific. This is the 5-day forecast. It does aim towards the Baja here, but I'm going to tell you, once it gets up here, it should be substantially weaker. A remnant low, maybe some moisture spilling across parts of mainland Mexico, maybe into parts of Texas, but you know, it'll be limited, and nothing like we saw with Norbert and Odile, at least what it looks like now. Looking at the Atlantic Basin, just a small area of development chance here in the open Atlantic. This one little area, even if it does develop, it head off to the north, it looks like. There's pretty strong westerly winds cutting across this region right now. Wind shear very strong, not allowing anything to develop. We're also not in a favorable upward motion pattern, what we call the Madden-Julian oscillation. You typically want to see it in this area, these colors here, these spaghetti lines, over here if you want development in the Atlantic Basin. And right now, it's favoring the western Pacific, and it's just not favoring the Atlantic Basin. And so we have a lot of sinking air in our region of the world, and the more active areas are the western Pacific, and to some extent in the East Pac where we see Rachel. But even in the eastern Pacific, it's not all that conducive, and therefore Rachel's not expected to become a hurricane. And even if it does, it would be probably pretty weak. The Euros version, the ECMWF, right there, for the MJO, showing even less favorable conditions. It's favoring phases 5, 6, maybe 7. And if we compare that back to the GFS, it was kind of favoring phases 7 and 8. But both showing one similarity, and that is that the magnitude of the Madden-Julian oscillation would be very weak. And what I mean by that, if you see it coming out like this, then that's a very strong signal. And as you can tell, the Euro showing it all in the circle here. These are all these yellow things are the ensemble members. Different versions of the model run with slightly different variables to give a different output, but the actual operational Euro inside the circle meaning the Madden-Julian Oscillation is hardly even there. So it looks like a very quiet couple of weeks ahead for the Atlantic Basin, though once we get past mid-October, we normally get a little bit of a bump in the climatological uptick of tropical cyclone activity. Will that happen this year? Well, you never know. You never turn your back on the season until it's all over at the end of November, and then you can put everything away and be ready for the winter, and then eventually the next hurricane season. But things are looking pretty good. I wouldn't worry about it too much. So the weekend ahead, definitely no worries out of the tropics. Some rainfall coming out of the Gulf with a stalled front and different low-pressure waves riding up, which, if it were January, wow, that would make for some interesting headlines. But it's not. It's late September. Enjoy the fall weather without the worry of any hurricanes anywhere in the eastern Pacific or the Atlantic Basin for the time being. All right, well, that is it for me for today. Have a good rest of your Thursday. Thanks for tuning in. Again, I'm Mark Sept for HurricaneTrack.com, my website. Always a privilege and an honor to produce these videos for you to enjoy on Hurricane Pro and HD. I'll talk to you again next week.